Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to my Unity Endless Runner tutorial series, where we're taking a look at all the basics you need to make your own Endless Runner game. So, in the previous episode, we covered how to make platforms ahead of the character and how to destroy them behind them. And then we said we were going to look at how to make some random platforms. But I've had a few people on those videos ask me about object pooling and how that works and how we could implement it in our game. So it was a topic that I was going to cover a little bit later down the line, but since people are asking about it, I said let's cover it here as soon as we can, so we can take a look at how this works. And since we've just learned about how to create and destroy things, this is a way that helps save on some processing time. So the way we've created our scripts, if we just open up, say, our platform destroyer, and we'll also open up our platform generator as well. The way they work is when we get to the point where we need a new platform, it pulls it in from the prefabs and creates a brand new object. And then once it goes off the screen over to the left, once we're no longer using it, it destroys the object and it's no longer being used in our game. Okay, so when you instantiate an object, which is what we're doing in our platform generator script, we're instantiating the platform, that requires a little bit of CPU time. And when you destroy an object, that also requires a little CPU time. And the way Unity works is it uses a thing called the garbage collector, which basically says any unused memory, which is what is being created when we destroy an object. When we destroy an object, it's basically emptying that space in memory, but it's not like getting rid of it. So what happens is Unity every so often, every second, I don't know if it's every second or every 2 seconds or something like that. Basically, it runs this thing called a garbage collector, which goes and says, okay, any unused memory at the moment, let's clear all that out so we can free it up for any new objects that are going to be created. And what happens then is if you have a lot of this stuff happening, it'll create a little lag in your game. And if that's happening over and over again, which could happen when we're creating lots of platforms, what you'll have is every second there'll be a little spike of slowdown, and then it'll go back to normal speed, and it'll slow for like a fraction of a second and go back to normal speed, and keep repeating that cycle, which is not very useful at all. So what happens with object pooling is essentially you create a whole load of your platforms. We know from like running the game here that with our platforms, with these guys, we just zoom out. So it creates all our platforms there, and there we go. So at any one time, we've got like 6 or 7 different platforms active at the moment. So what we can do is just straight away create 7 platforms, and all we do is we set them all to be like not active at first so nobody can see them. And every time we need to create a new platform, rather than like dragging it in and creating a brand new thing and then destroying it, all we do is activate that platform, move it to the position it has to be in, and then as it travels along and it gets behind the camera and gets to the point where we would destroy it, instead of destroying it, all we do is tell it, okay, you're no longer active anymore and you're available to be pulled back ahead of the queue. And it's a fairly simple system. It's not too complicated. It's a little bit more complicated than simply instantiating an object and then destroying it. But at the same time, it's also relatively straightforward. So we're going to take a look at doing that now. So what we'll need to do is, on our destroy script, instead of destroying the game object, what we're going to do is we're going to comment that out, which is the way you do that is just put 2 little slashes in front of it, and that means it won't read this little bit of text here. And basically all we're going to do here is say, instead of destroying the game object, we're going to take our game object and we're going to say set active, and then in a bracket false. So what this will do is, instead of deleting the object, it'll just tell it to deactivate. So for example, if we go back in here and play the game, now when our platforms go off the screen, we'll see them turn to grey instead of black. So as it goes along, goes off the screen, our objects start to become deactivated. But at the moment they're not being reused. Nothing's happening with them. Okay, so if we go back in here, On our platform generator script, we've got this little thing that's instantiating the platforms. So we're no longer going to use that either. So we're going to comment that out. But at the moment, we don't have anything that's able to create a pool of objects, and then we're able to pull from that pool. So we're going to need to create a brand new script. So we'll just save that for now. Go back in here, and we're going to create a new C# script. Whenever it decides to create, because it's loading stuff there. So we're going to create a new C# script, and we're going to call it object pooler. And we're going to open this up in MonoDevelop, of course. So we're going to need a few different variables here. So obviously, we're going to need to know what object we're pooling, which will be the platform that we have in the game, or we'll use a prefab that we created like we did last time. So we're going to go public game object pooled object, just like that. So that's the object we're going to be used. We need to have an amount of objects that we're going to automatically pool. So we're going to say public int pooled amount. So that's how many we're going to use. And then finally, we're going to use a thing called a list. So what this is going to be is a list of, no, not iList, just list of, actually, no, before we create a list, to be able to use lists within Unity, because lists are a special extra case, they're not built in by default. What you have to do is go up here and say using system.collections.generic. And basically all that does is it enables you to be able to use lists. It's pulling in certain commands from a different area and you being able to use them then. You don't really need to know how that's working. You just need to know that you have to put that in if you want to use lists. So we're going to say a list here, and what this list is going to be is a list of game object. And what is a list? It's fairly self-explanatory. If it's essentially just a list of objects, and it can be any length that you want it to be. In this case, it's going to be the length of our pooled amount. So what we're going to need to do is, so we've got a list, and basically just at the moment this is just an empty list that doesn't do anything. Excuse me. We've got nothing in there, but we want to be able to set it with an amount. With the amount that we've selected, we need to be able to set it filled with our platforms. So in our start function here, what we're going to say is pooled objects even. So we're looking at our list. So pooled objects is equal to a new list of game objects. And we're just saying that to make sure we've got a clear and empty list here. So what we're going to use here is a for loop, which is something we haven't covered yet, but it's relatively straightforward. So basically, a loop within Unity and within C# works by just, it has a certain value that it starts off with, and it checks this value against some variable, which will be our pooled amount, and then it checks if this statement is true, then it runs a little bit of code in the middle of it, and then you have something that updates that original variable, and then it checks it again. So in this situation, we're going to have we're going to create a new int, so a new number, and we're just going to call this I. So int I is equal to 0. So we're starting with a value of 0, and if I is less than our pooled amount, like that. So we're starting with 0. If I is less than our pooled amount, then we're going to run our bit of code in the middle, and then we're going to say I plus plus. So what I plus plus does is it just adds 1 onto I. So then in our little loop here, we're going to say, okay, what we want to do every single time, we want to fill up this list with the number of pooled amount. So every time within here, we want to say, okay, the next space in our list, we want to put in our a copy of the platform. So the way we can do that is say game object, which is we're creating a new game object here, which is going to go into our list. And we're just going to call this a generic name. We'll just say, no, not object, just obj for object. So game object is equal to, and we're going to instantiate, which is what we used before to create our platforms, which is in the script here. So we used instantiate before, and we're going to instantiate the pooled object. So pooled object like that. And we don't have to give any position or rotation to this because this is going to be an object that we're going to move within the world later on. Now, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but the way Unity works is if you want to instantiate something like this into a game object, you have to make sure that it is a game object. And the way to make sure of that within Unity is to put a little bracket before it, and inside that we're going to say game object. And what that does is it takes whatever is coming behind that and it converts it into a game object. It's called casting it into a game object. So you're doing a game object cast and making sure that our pooled object here is definitely a game object so it can go into our list. So we've created an object which is our platform, which will be our pooled object here, which will be our platform. And what we're doing is we're getting that object and we're saying that, okay, we've created a new object, but we don't want it to be activated in the scene. So we'll say object.setActive is false, just like that. And so now that we have our object and we have it deactivated, now we can add it into the list. And the way we do that is say pooled objects, which is the name of our list, pool objects dot add. And then inside some brackets, we're going to add this object that we just had. So we've added that object to the list, and now that's in our list just there. So now once it does that the very first time, it'll get to the end of this and it'll say, okay, we've got to the end of our loop, so let's go back up to the top. I has now become 1 because it's I++, and it'll say, okay, is I still less than our pooled amount? Say our amount is 5, and it'll go, it's still less than 5. Okay, run this bit of code. We're going to instantiate another object. We're going to set that object to false, and we're going to add the object to the list. So now we have 2 objects in our list, and it'll go again and it'll say, okay, I is 2. Is that less than our pooled amount? And so on until we reach the value of our pooled amount. So before we do anything else, we're going to see that in action back in the game. So if we go in here, wait for this to compile down here, and then we're going to create a new object. Create an empty object, and we're going to click on this and rename it to, we'll just call it object pooler, just to keep it nice and simple. And then we're going to add that script on here, our object pooler script. And what we're going to do is, so to start off with, we're going to say it can create 10 objects, say, which is much more than we'll need, but that's okay. Actually, no, we'll set it to say 5. That'll do. Okay, and then what do we need to do? Oh yeah, we need to create an object for it to go into. So in our prefabs folder, we're going to grab our platform and pop it in there. So what this will do is straight away at the start of our game, it's going to pull in 5 platforms. So I'm just going to set it on pause, so it'll only do to run that first frame. And so we hit play, and then what we should see is our scene itself doesn't change. We don't see anything happen, but in our hierarchy we've got 5 objects here now that we're able to use within the game. At the moment we have nothing that's able to call these platforms into action, but that's what we're going to create right now. So still in our platform generator here, we've nothing really we can do. We know that those objects exist, but we've no way to access them. So what we need to do is get rid of this void update, because we're not going to use update at all. And we're going to create a new method in here. So much like we've had like start and update. I don't think we have used methods yet, have we? We had our camera and we had player. No, we haven't covered using methods. Just wanted to make sure. Yeah, so essentially a method is just a simple little, a function is just a simple little method that we can call at any time we want to. And the way it works is, as long as we make it public, like we have our values and stuff, we can call it from any other object within the game. So what we're going to do is create a new function. You'll see it in action here. The best way is just to like jump into it and you'll see it's fairly straightforward. So we're going to say public game object get pooled object. So what this is doing is, and we need to make some curly brackets before to open and close it, of course. So this is a public and it's using game object and it's going to get a pooled object. So what this is saying is it's looking for a game object and it's going to get a pooled object, and we'll be able to call this from another script, and this is how we're going to find which object we need. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to go to our list here and search through the list and see where we can find an object that is not active yet, because obviously we don't want to have it create 5 objects ahead of the player and then it gets to here and it says, okay, I need another object, I'm going to grab one of these ones that's already active and pop that in front, and then we've got a big gap in the middle that we don't want to use. Obviously we don't want that happening, so we need to make sure that the object that we're going to pull is not active yet. So we're going to use another for loop again, and we're going to set it up the exact same way as we did before. So we're going to say int I is equal to 0 and then a semicolon, and then as long as I is less than our pooled, actually no, instead of doing our pooled amount, because our list might, in certain situations that we're going to take a look at in just a few minutes, it might end up longer than our pooled amount. So instead of saying pooled amount, what we're going to do is say our pooled objects list, if I could spell right it would be alright, pooled objects dot count. And basically all that does is say, okay, our pooled objects list, how long is it? I count how long it is, and that'll give the value. And again we're going to say I plus plus at the end there, like that. Okay, and then we need some, again, if things would line up for me, we need some curly brackets just there like that. And here we're going to say if pooled objects square bracket I. So what this says is, so we know we have our int value here, which is I, and it'll go, okay, I is 0, and in our pool objects list, which is created automatically, we're going to go to position 0 within that list. So just as a way to show this in action, if we go in here on our object pooler, we can't see the list. If we go to debug here, so this is our list of pooled objects. At the moment there's nothing in it until we start running the game. So if we press play here, once the game starts, it immediately creates 5 objects and they're added to our pooled objects list. And you can see its size is 5, so back in here that'll be our pooled objects.count, it will be 5. And as we can see, the very first time it runs through, our int I will be 0. So the way lists and the same with arrays and stuff like that in programming work is that like the very first object in the list isn't 1, it's 0. So as you can see here, we've got element 0, which will be the first platform in the list, then element 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 5 objects, but the highest number is 4. So you always have to remember that it's that 1 less than you would normally logically think what it is. So here we're going to say if pooled objects I, so I being 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or well, it can only go up to 4 because it has to be less than our count. So if pooled object I dot active in hierarchy, and basically all that says is it active within the scene as is at the moment. And because this is an if statement, which we've looked at before, of course, we have to have some curly brackets. So if the object that we've found in the list, if that one is active, then we can return pooled object I, like that. So what this says is, okay, say our platform generator script has said, okay, I want an object, so give me the next object from the list. So it comes in here and it goes, okay, let me see, let's find what object is available on the list. Is something not active yet? Okay, I found a platform that is not active. I'm going to return to you this particular pooled object. So that's pooled object I. So say the first two objects on the list are active, and we get to the third one and it goes, okay, this one isn't active. So we're at this stage we're at int I is equal to 3. Or sorry, we're getting the third object in the list. So what we're saying is int I is equal to 2, which is element 2. So it goes, okay, int I is 2. So 2 is not active. So therefore I being 2, we can grab that object from the list by saying pool object I, and say, okay, this guy isn't active. Here you go, you can have him. And because we're saying return, what that does is go, okay, something has been returned now, so nothing else in the script will run, and it won't keep looping around trying to find another active object. But if we get to I0, and the very first object is active. Actually, what we're looking for here is an object that is active. By putting a not in front of it, that means it's not active. Sorry, that was a mistake by me. I should have realized that earlier. We're saying it's not active, so then it'll return an object. But if the object is active, then this if statement is false, so it doesn't read this bit, and it just skips that, and it gets to the bottom of the for, and it goes back up and loops around again, and just keeps checking and checking until it finds something that's true. So the next thing is down here, what if all our objects in our list are active and there's nothing we can do? We will probably want a way to add another object to the list to make sure that there's some extra space available. So what we're going to say here is next is basically all we're going to do is copy the exact same script that we had here, because we just want to add a new object to the list. So what we're going to do is instantiate an object again, set it to not be active, and then add it to the list. And then the next thing we want to do is, now that we know there's definitely a free object in the list, which is the one we've just created, so we can return that object in particular. So we go return obj, which is the object that we just created. So now we know that that one's definitely free, so we can send it back out to the script. So if we save this now, we should be able to see this in action. Yeah, I think this should all work fine. So what we obviously at the moment, if we run back to the game, just stop that playing, wait for it to compile. Oh, what's going on here? 33. Return pooled objects. Oh, that should have an S at the end. We're not returning a pooled object. We're returning it from the list of pooled objects. So save that. Again, it's always important within Unity to make sure that everything is spelled exactly right, because so often those are the causes of very basic little errors. Okay, so yeah, like I said, we've created this little way of getting an object from the script, but obviously at the moment there's nothing to do it. It's just going, okay, we've created a whole bunch of objects, but there's nothing to call new object into the scene, so we're still having our platforms just disappear. So we need to, in our platform generator, we need to be able to call these objects. So all we need to do first up here is create a reference to this object pooler object. So we're going to say public object pooler, which is obviously the script we just created, and we're going to call this the object pool. And then instead of instantiating a brand new platform every time, here we're going to say the object pool dot what was the name we called get pooled object. Yes, so the object pool dot get pooled object, put some curly brackets, and we end that with a statement. So what this will do, basically what it'll do is well, at the moment it won't do anything. All it's saying is that, like, okay, we're going to get an object from this list, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So what we need to do is set this to be equal to something. So we're going to say, what we're going to do is create a new game object right here, and we're going to call it new platform, and we're going to say that's equal to the object.getPooledObject. So what we're saying is we're going to create a nice little new platform object, and that's going to be equal to a free object from the list that's inside. And then here we're going to say, so we've got this new platform, we need to be able to put it into a certain place. We know what position we want to put into it because we've done that before. So here we're going to say our new platform that we just created, the transform dot position of that is now equal to our transform dot position as we had used before. Oh, if I could spell position, that would be okay. Transform dot position, because as we know here, we've set our transform dot position to be with the platform width and the distance between and all that stuff. We need to give it a rotation value because although we instantiated it before, it didn't have any value. New platform dot transform dot rotation, because it was instantiated without any rotation, so we need to make sure that its rotation is perfectly fine. So transform dot rotation, and then finally, because every object in our list is not active by default, we're going to say new platform dot set active true. So we're going to save this, and now what we should see once we go back into Unity, and assuming everything is working okay for us, is once the script runs, we should see that we'll see our bunch of objects being created. We'll actually, first of all, we'll make sure that it works perfectly fine by itself. So we'll make more platforms than we actually need, because we only ever need like 6 or 7 at a time. But in our platform generator, we need to make sure we hook the object pool up. So we'll grab our object pooler and pop it in there like that. And now it knows where it's able to call the platforms from. So what we're going to do is leave it paused first, and we'll play the game. And immediately, straight away, all our platforms are created, and it's gone and grabbed the first platform from the list and it's created it and it's put it exactly in place where it wants to. If we pop it on one more, it's created another one. Pop it on one more, it's created another one. I think that's as far as it'll go before we... Yeah, no, that's just as far as we want needs to go for the moment. So now we've got 3 little platforms created. We've got 10 platforms created, and only 3 of them are active at the moment. So we're going to start running this now, and what we'll see is it's going to add more and more, activate more, and it's going to deactivate. And as you can see just flash for a second. It deactivates one, and then when it needs a new one, it finds the first empty one in the list and it will activate that. And as you can see, we've got 3 extra ones here that are just not being reached at all. So we're in a situation now where we've used up more memory than we really need to be using up. So we don't really want that. So obviously we've created too many. We know we created too many anyway. So let's do the opposite of that, and we'll set it to just create 2. and we'll hit play. And what we should see this time is we'll see, yep, the platform is being there, but it needs more than it's been allowed to destroy yet. So you can see it starts adding more and more, but now it's kind of reached its limit. It's like, okay, we have enough platforms. It had to create one more little one, because as I said, I think 7 is what we need with the settings we have at the moment. But now it's automatically decided, okay, we haven't had a need for any more than 7. So we've created just enough that we need. None of them are being destroyed and wasting time with the garbage collector, as I talked about earlier on, going like, okay, I need to delete everything. None of that has happened. So now we've got 7 platforms constantly recycling themselves, moving themselves into a new position, and we're not dealing with wasted memory and wasted, more importantly, especially on mobile, which is where you would typically find these kind of endless runner games, you're not wasting processing power, which is something that phones are more likely to be limited on. So yeah, that's the basics of having a nice little object pooler script going. Like I said, it was something I was going to look at covering later on in the series, but enough people were asking about it that I figured it was best to show what the best kind of practices for these stuff is, because you always want to be aware of your memory and stuff like that when you're making a game like this. Obviously, optimizing your game later on down the line is something that you'll want to take a look at, and it's something that we're going to cover in the series as well. But this is a big way to like save on your processing time and your memory as well. So yeah, thanks for watching this episode. I will be back soon. Next time we're going to take a look at adding random platforms into our series, which is a little bit more complicated with the object pooler. So we might deactivate the object pooler while we first look at randomizing our platforms, but then we'll bring it all back in and tie it all together and make it all as fun and functional as it can possibly be. So thanks for watching this episode, and I'll be back soon with more endless running goodness.